Hi, everybody. I hope you are doing well today. We are in the middle of the Christmas season now. Hope you're getting some time to enjoy family Christmas movies. I got to watch one of my favorites last night, Scrooged with Bill Murray. Watched it with my wife and son, Luke, a little bit. Good times. But hope you're doing well, and thank you for joining me. I am a little bit worried about the tech stuff this morning. So if we crash, and I'd put it at 60-40 that we crash. I'm recording, so it will be uploaded later if it doesn't stream all the way through from beginning to end. I said that I was going to start each week now with a book recommendation on our topic. This is one of my favorite books over the past, 7 years. Far as the Curse is Found by Michael Williams. He was one of my professors at Covenant Theological Seminary, and it's the covenant story of redemption. So he walks through the different covenants of the Bible. Very well written, easy to follow, excellent book if you're looking for an overview of the whole Bible story and the covenants of the Bible. So Michael Williams, As Far as the Curse is Found. Again, Christmas is coming, so you could have that as that's a great stocking stuffer. This week is a bit of a bridge week between Abraham last week and the Abrahamic covenant, which we talked about, and the next major event kind of in the redemptive historical timeline is the Exodus and the Mosaic covenant. But there's a lot of time in between Abraham and Moses, and this week is a bit of a bridge between those two key figures. And as a part of this bridge, we're going to be talking about three key people: Jacob, Joseph, and a little bit of Moses's, you might want to call it, backstory. But if you remember, last week we talked about Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant and God's unilateral commitment to Abraham, that he was going to bless him, and the blessings came in really three different ways. I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to the nations. I'm going to give you seed. Your posterity will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and land. He takes Abraham out and says, this land that you're looking at, this will be your land, but not yet. The time hasn't come. Know for sure that your descendants will live as sojourners and slaves in a land for 400 years before I bring them back to this land and give it to them. So that was the Abrahamic covenant: seed, land, and blessing. Abraham struggled for a long time because he didn't have any children of his own, at least with his wife Sarah. He had Ishmael, and before that he had a servant son. But God said, no, it's not going to be through Hagar and Ishmael. You will have a son through Sarah, and we saw how that played out last week as Isaac was born, and Isaac's life was saved, right, at Mount Moriah. Isaac doesn't die on Mount Moriah because Jehovah Jireh, the Lord, provides. Eventually, Isaac grows up, marries Rebekah, and has two sons of his own, Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau. And this is what, they're twins, Jacob and Esau, born at the same time. Esau was born slightly before Jacob and came out reddish and hairy, but Jacob came out grasping his heel. And when God speaks to Rebekah, this is how he describes the situation. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Esau becomes the nation of Edom, and we know Jacob eventually has his name changed to Israel and becomes the father of the nation of Israel. God, in choosing Jacob, really sets kind of the norms on their head. Normally, it would be the oldest son, Esau, who would receive this kind of a blessing. But God's purposes were different. And he chooses the younger here, who will be the heir to the covenant promises. And you see this played out in the book of Genesis. The covenant promises that were given to Abraham are reaffirmed with Isaac. There's a lot to the story that we are absolutely not going to cover. We're hitting the high points here. Rebecca, whose name, I love this part, Rebecca, whose name means rope with a noose or ensnare, or this is my favorite, to clog by tying. And I know that because my sister's name is Rebecca, and we used to torment her by calling her to clog by tying. But Rebecca and Jacob, his name means heel grasper or supplanter, are schemers. God had a plan that the blessings were going to go to Jacob, but Isaac wasn't quite attuned to this plan, we don't think. And Jacob and Rebecca didn't trust in God's ability to work his plan out. So they're schemers, and they trick their father Isaac into blessing Jacob. Esau has already scorned his birthright and sold his birthright to Jacob for a pot of stew. But Jacob and Rebekah go even further and steal from him his blessing as the elder. Jacob steals his blessing, steals his brother's birthright, and obviously leads to tensions between Jacob and Esau. Jacob flees and eventually comes to the place where he meets a man named Laban and falls in love with one of Laban's daughters named Rachel. And he enters into an agreement to work, I think it's for 7 years, to earn Rachel's hand in marriage. And he works for 7 years, but he himself is the victim of some scheming. And on his wedding night, he thinks he's married Rachel, but nope, it's her older sister, Leah. And so he ends up working for 7 more years. He's married Leah now. He works for 7 more years and has another chance to marry Rachel, and he does. So he's got 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. He loves Rachel. He loves Rachel. But Rachel doesn't give him any sons, at least for a long time. Leah produces 6 sons, and then through her concubines and other servants, Jacob has a total of 10 sons with women other than Rachel. But eventually Rachel gives him 2 sons, his youngest 2, Joseph and Benjamin. And Joseph is very clearly Jacob's favorite. The story is actually a kind of painful story to read if you've read it before. Jacob definitely bestows honor onto his son Joseph that he does not. He shows favoritism. Joseph isn't smart enough to understand how to keep that under wraps, but kind of gloats and boasts and tells his brothers about his dreams that they're going to eventually bow down to him. And they come true, but it's still probably not the wisest thing to go and tell your brothers about these dreams and gloat about your coat of many colors and things like that. So there's bad blood between his brothers and him. And the story, as I said, it's a painful story. One day his brothers are out in the field and Joseph goes looking for him. And they see him coming over the hill and say, "There's Joseph the dreamer. Why don't we murder him?" One of the brothers says, "Let's not murder him. Let's throw him in the well here." And eventually he gets sold into slavery. Through twists and turns, he finds himself in Potiphar's house and is rising in Potiphar's house, doing well for himself there, though a slave. Until, again, Providence takes a dramatic turn, and Potiphar's wife accuses him of trying to rape her. And he's immediately thrown into prison in Egypt, where he's living at the time. Through, again, God's providence, he rises in the prison system, is given responsibilities, and becomes the go-to for people who have dreams. And the baker and the cupbearer both come to him with dreams and want their dreams interpreted. And word gets out that Joseph can interpret dreams. And he's called upon to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. And because he does so successfully, Pharaoh lets him out of prison and gives him an incredibly high position, second only to Pharaoh in all of Egypt. And part of his responsibility is to prepare Egypt for the years of famine that are coming. That was part of Pharaoh's dream. There's going to be good years followed by years of famine, and we need to save during these good years so that we don't starve during the years of famine. And Joseph is put in charge of that project. Eventually, the famine does come, and Abraham and his brothers, who don't even know that Joseph is alive, right? I said Abraham, I'm sorry, Jacob. Jacob and his brothers don't even know that Joseph is alive. But the famine hits the land that they're living in, and so they go to Egypt to buy grain so that they don't starve. And through lots of process of intrigue, that Joseph reveals himself to them, and they're terrified that he's going to exact vengeance on them. But he doesn't. They go back. They have to tell Jacob that their son Joseph, that his son Joseph is actually alive. And there's a family reunion of sorts in Egypt. God was working all of this providentially again so that he would preserve the line of Abraham that was running through Jacob and his sons, who become the 12 tribes, in essence, of Israel. So the book of Genesis ends with Jacob dying and his sons carrying his bones back to the land of his fathers to be buried, but then returning to Egypt and living in Egypt, where Joseph is still a high official and they're living productive lives. But remember God's words to Abraham, that Abraham's descendants were going to live for 400 years in a country, in a land that wasn't their own, and they'd be sojourners and they'd be servants and slaves in this land. When you reach the book of Genesis, you see them living in a land that's not their own, but they're doing pretty well. They're not slaves and servants. But the book of Exodus starts with these words. Actually, this is verse 8. And now there rose a king over Egypt, a Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph. So all the good, how Joseph had saved Egypt from this famine, that's been forgotten. And we read that the people of Israel, or the Hebrew people, had grown incredibly numerous at this point, so much so that the Egyptians were worried. What if they rise up against us? So they've grown numerous, even in adverse conditions. And Pharaoh has this incredibly evil plan. He tells the two Hebrew midwives, when a woman is on the birthing stool, when the child comes out, if it's a son, kill the child. If it's a daughter, let it live. The Hebrew midwives are not about to do this because they fear God. And so they lie to Pharaoh and say, the Hebrew women give birth so quickly that by the time we're there, it's a done deal. Well, that spares them and spares multiple hundreds, thousands of Hebrew infants. But Pharaoh then tells the people, and probably his soldiers, go out, and when you hear Hebrew children being born, if it's a male child, kill the male child. Well, at this time, a young Hebrew family gives birth to a son, and they keep the son hidden and quiet until it becomes impossible. And eventually, rather than having their child killed in front of their very eyes, they build a basket and put the child, the boy, in a basket and send it down the Nile River, and trusting this baby boy to God's care. As providence, again, I'm using that word a lot and intentionally, as providence would have it, this baby boy is plucked up out of the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter and given the name Moses. Moses becomes an incredibly important figure, but we're going to talk all about Moses, his journey, the Exodus, and the Mosaic Covenant next week. But I want to stop there. And we've hit on three important figures: Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. There's a lot of things we left out, right? A lot of good stories, a lot of really horrific stories. The story of Dinah is maybe one of the most horrific stories in the Bible. So I'm not trying to cover every story, but these three people, I think, are key figures in the story of redemption. And we learn three things, or we learn a few big lessons from looking at these three individuals and their lives. First, you see God's sovereign, providential care of his people. All through these stories of the patriarchs, you see how God provides. When Sarah is not producing children, God finds a way. When Jacob's wife, Rachel, is not producing children, God eventually finds a way. Through famine, right, that threatens to destroy the line of Abraham, God finds a very twisting, turning way to accomplish his purposes. Through hostile neighbors, even through sin and kind of a lack of wisdom. When you read the story, it's shocking how many times Abraham lies about his wife Sarah and says, no, she's not my wife, she's my sister, and has his wife taken into a king's harem. And then Jacob does the same thing. Isaac does the same thing. And it's mind-blowing. But God saves them even from their own folly, providentially, sovereignly, overseeing history and guiding it to its predestined end. So you see that in all of these stories. You can't miss it. You also see, especially with the story of Jacob, the doctrine of election. Jacob, throughout this whole series of Bible stories, we see God choosing, right? It's Seth, not Cain. It's Shem and Japheth, not Ham. It's Abraham, not any of the other, ancient peoples living at the times. It's Isaac, not Ishmael. But then when you come to Jacob and Esau, in this sovereign picking, election choosing, is more profound, because the choosing happens even before they're born. Jacob I have chosen, the older will serve the younger. My promises are going to run through Jacob and his line. As Malachi says, Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated. Hyperbole there. But the Apostle Paul picks up on that to highlight the doctrine of election, that God is free in choosing whom he wants. Now, ultimately, this points us to Christ, who is the chosen one of God. When we talk about the elect, we talk about it corporately, right? The elect, or maybe someone is part of the elect. But when you talk about Jesus, he is the chosen one, preeminently. So Isaiah 42, one of the servant songs, says, "Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights." Or Luke 9:35. This is at Jesus' transfiguration. The voice comes from heaven, comes out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." So we talk about the doctrine of election, and we look at people like Jacob, who is chosen over Esau. That is simply a type. It's foreshadowing Jesus, who is the chosen one. And we can talk about the elect, yes, and the elect are chosen because they're chosen in Christ. He is the elect. In the story, you also see, especially the story of Joseph, how God uses evil for good purposes. After Jacob has died, Joseph's brothers are particularly worried that Joseph, now that dad's out of the picture, will exact revenge on them for trying to kill him, selling him into slavery. But in Genesis chapter 50, this is what Joseph says to them. Pardon me here. It says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So you had evil plans. That's why you sold me into slavery. You don't get credit for this. You're blameworthy, but God meant it for a good purpose, that I would save you and save the people of Egypt from the famine. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's a theme that the apostles pick up on, talking about Jesus and his crucifixion several different times. You can look at Acts chapter 2. The apostles are preaching at the day of Pentecost, and they say, "Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men." It was part of God's plan. He meant it for good, but you're blameworthy. You're culpable of this tremendous evil. You crucified him. Out of this most evil act in history, God brings the most good. The same theme is in Acts 4:27 and 28. "Truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus." This is a prayer. "Whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do what your hand and your plan had predestined to take place." So they do this evil thing, and they mean it for evil. It's sin, and yet you're using it to accomplish a cosmic good. You're bringing redemption. Which leads to the last lesson that these stories teach us. And it's the lesson that I said comes out of all these stories that I drilled into my kids' heads over and over again. God saves his people. All these stories about how God saved, Jacob from this catastrophe, or Jacob and his sons from starving, or Joseph from catastrophe, or Moses from the Nile. All those stories are just foreshadowing. They're penultimate, and they're foreshadowing the ultimate salvation that comes through Jesus Christ. Not just salvation from the flood waters like he saved Noah, or from the waters of the Nile like he saved Moses, but salvation from all that is bad and all that is evil. The salvation that Jesus offers is as far as the curse is found, as we sing in the great song, the great Christmas carol, "Joy to the World." So all these things we see coming together in these stories. God's providence, his purposes and election, his use of evil to accomplish his purposes, and how he orchestrates it all to save his people. That's pointing us all, through all these stories, directly to Jesus. I think that's a good way to end this Bible study with Jesus. He is the final word. We'll come back next week and talk more about Moses, the Exodus, and the covenant at Sinai, and I look forward to that. If you have questions, please don't hesitate. I don't think I'll have to take any weeks off over the Christmas season. I might shoot some of these out from my basement, so the setting might be a little bit different, but I think I'll still be able to do all of them. So if you have questions, feel free to email me, leave comments, and again, thanks for spending time with me. Hope you have a great day.